Let's go now to number 2, the Charlotte Hornets. And I think that this is really the inflection point of the draft in a lot of ways, because I can see them going really one of two ways. I would be surprised if they took Amen Thompson at number 2.
Agree. Yeah.
I'm not going to rule it out like 100% at this point, but it would be pretty surprising to me. It's going to be, I would think, one of Brandon Miller or Scoot Henderson. It's interesting. This front office has a very real split over the last few years in terms of what they do. It used to be that this Jordan run team would select all of these like older prospects, guys that like made, all-American teams, essentially. Your Frank Kaminsky, Cody Zeller, Kemba Walker, Miles Bridges, PJ Washington, etc. Right? That tended to be more their MO, which would kind of pigeon them toward Brandon Miller a little bit more. Over the last few years, basically since they drafted LaMelo Ball, they've been more willing to go younger and been more willing to take project-y type of players, maybe is the fairest way to put it. Think of guys like LaMelo Ball, Nick Richards, I'm trying to think, like JT Thor, Kai Jones, Bryce McGowan's, guys like that. This is a much bigger deal than taking those guys late in the first, early second, right?
Yep.
But I wonder what the push-pull in that front office is going to be like in terms of trying to decide between those two players.
It's fascinating. I think it's very clear on paper the better fit next to LaMelo Ball is Brandon Miller. I think that it makes more sense from a spacing standpoint. It gives them more positional size in the way they want to play.
It's so funny you say that because I disagree. So
really?
I want you to give your case. Yeah.
All right. So I think LaMelo Ball is one of those guys who, if I were in charge of his organization, I'd be thinking, keep it simple, stupid. Put the ball in his hands, a lot of high pick and roll, try to get him on the move every now and then. Have a secondary creator for times when teams give him extra attention, who can also run a high ball screen. And honestly, almost run an offense like Alabama did this year under Nate Oates' direction, where they had kind of 5-out, great immaculate spacing, high ball screens and 3-man actions in the middle of the floor with a big at the trail spot and 2 handler creators in those slots. You put Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball in those, you've got positional size. You've got a guy in Miller who's a 40% three-point shooter spacing around LaMelo, and you just let him cook more in ball screens and in transition. I think Miller's a really good rebound and run type of player. Doesn't really get talked about enough. He's a pretty good rebounder for a guy who's 6'9" and seen as pretty skinny. So I like the thought of having those guys be able to do all of the things on offense that you want to do with LaMelo Ball. But it's the defensive versatility for me that makes the most sense. That LaMelo probably needs a little bit of the Kemba Walker treatment that he got in Boston in his later years, where you surround him with positional length 2 through 4. You try to scram switch him out of the post if teams try to go at him in postseason situations. Just surround him with as much shooting and length as possible so that you can blanket him on defense. And I don't know if a Scoot Henderson LaMelo Ball combination gives the Hornets a recipe to hide LaMelo on defense. I'm not as worried about Scoot Henderson's ability to hold up long term. It's LaMelo, and that pairing with the two of them can be pretty tough on D.
So my counter to that would be, if you're worried in that way about LaMelo in terms of his ability to hold up and everything, shouldn't you just be taking
Scoot,
the dude, right?
That's right.
Where you think Scoot can be the dude. Because I think Scoot is a higher upside long-term than Brandon Miller. It's no disrespect to Brandon Miller. I think Scoot is one of the best guards I've ever evaluated, just point blank. And the reason that I actually really like Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson, I think that their offensive styles really complement one another exceedingly well. LaMelo tends to be more of a threes and layups guy. He came up in that scheme that his father ran for many years with him and Lonzo and LiAngelo. And he doesn't really have much of an in-between game. It's more he's going to try and step back to get to the three. He's going to try and run out on the break and create outlet passes, create fast break opportunities, right? Or he's going to try and get to the rim and finish because he's 6'8" now and he has that capability, right? Scoot actually really profiles well with that. Scoot loves to be able to get to the basket, certainly, but he thrives in the mid-range. So you're going to have LaMelo Ball who can space it out to like 27 feet, which like to a point where you really need to guard him, especially as he continues to grow and mature and get stronger. I think you actually are really going to have to guard him out there. That's going to create more space for Scoot as like a second side creator trying to get to the mid-range. I think that Scoot as a primary creator is going to create a lot of opportunities for LaMelo as like this bigger, potentially cutter, potentially high-level intelligent mover. He doesn't move without the ball. I'm aware of this. Yeah. He has potential to do it. He does not do it. It's like a Trae Young situation where Trae tends to like float around the perimeter a lot. Has potential to do it. That would be my biggest worry here, is that LaMelo would float a little bit more if he's off the ball with Scoot. But LaMelo can really shoot. So even that has a little bit of gravity, I think, as well for Scoot getting into that mid-range area. Additionally, Scoot, great passer. I really like him as a passer. More geared towards scoring. Let's, not unfair to say that, right? I think he's actually like a really underrated high-level passer, but he is a little bit more geared toward that. LaMelo is a little bit more geared toward passing and playmaking, which I think really opens up a nice synergy between the two of them long-term. The last thing I will note is, if you think LaMelo might not be the guy, just in terms of like, he might not compete all the time. Like his help defense might be a bit of a, shambles from time to time. He might not move off the ball all the time. Incredibly creative, intelligent, high-level guard who is immensely talented, but like might not do all the other stuff. Scoot does all that stuff. Like Scoot is competitive as hell. He really wants it. He's aggressive. Like, he's a different dude than LaMelo, like in the way that I think you want to pair someone with LaMelo. So I think that fit really is like exactly what LaMelo kind of needs in like a secondary ball handler next to him, or a primary that, you shift back and forth between.
Yeah. It comes down to me if that's something that LaMelo would want. And it's really hard for me to see guys who come in as young players and get a ton of these on-ball reps trying to develop and thinking they're the future of the franchise have to share that in a fairly equal split, if not tipping the scales in the other direction, because Scoot, as you and I both believe, is a really damn good ball handler, deserves to have the ball in his hands a bunch. So this has potential, if you pair the two of them, to be explosively good. Unreal team in transition with Scoot and LaMelo Ball pushing. I think LaMelo gets easier shots as a result of Scoot's presence. I think that there's a lot of ways that they can make each other better on that end of the floor. But you would also have to be a little bit weary of kind of bothering the star that you have to try to bring in a second one. And you gotta be concerned about what this looks like on the defensive end of the floor with those two, because you are committing now to being smaller with Scoot and a little more porous at the point of attack with your secondary guy there in LaMelo. So I agree with you. Scoot is the better player. I think there is a way to justify the fit. I think it's a little cleaner of a fit with Brandon Miller. And that's what makes this a really intriguing process here for Charlotte to undertake. It, depending on how the ping pong balls bounced, maybe this wasn't necessarily going to be a huge discussion at number 2 because there was positional fit that some teams maybe needed. This one's really tricky, really, really tricky.